The problem with dairy is that it's so heterogeneous. You have different types of dairy, and there are many moving pieces involved. And that's where you'll typically see the confusion, because of all these factors working together. So let's break it down. Dairy can mean completely different things to different people. For example, if you're having a glass of milk, it's a completely different universe compared to having a frozen pizza or a block of butter in your coffee. Next, we have dose, exposure. There are very different amounts of dairy consumed by different populations and even different individuals. Some people may have small amounts, others might have large amounts, and that variability can make a big difference in health outcomes. We also need to consider the replacement aspect. What are you replacing dairy with? There's some really interesting work, particularly substitution analyses, done by the Harvard School of Public Health. What you typically see, both for cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality, is that if you're replacing dairy with other animal sources of protein and fat, you might see an increase in cardiovascular disease rates. However, if you replace dairy with seafood or plant-based proteins, there tends to be a reduction in disease risk. Then we have the what else is present in the dietary pattern aspect. In other words, what else are you eating alongside the dairy? And finally, individual variation, the WHO. Northern Europeans, for example, tend to be more tolerant of dairy, whereas among African Americans, there seems to be a higher prevalence of dairy intolerance compared to white populations. So when you put all of these moving pieces together, it's obvious that the context matters. Right off the bat, it's easy to see that extreme positions like dairy is poison, no matter how much you're having or who you are, you're damaging your health by including any dairy in your diet, are hard to take seriously. And similarly, the position that there's nothing wrong with any type of dairy in any amount, no matter who you are, is also an oversimplification. The USDA guidelines still propose dairy as a necessary fundamental part of a balanced diet. They've included it in the food plate, implying that it must be part of your diet. And if you remove dairy entirely, it can be problematic in certain populations where dairy is a key source of protein and calcium, and there are no good alternatives. In those cases, dairy can play an important role. However, what I think is misleading is suggesting that dairy is a necessity in the diets of Western populations, where there are so many other choices available. Claiming that you must have dairy is just as misleading as saying you have to eliminate all dairy, or you're damaging your health. Both of these positions stretch the science and aren't really helping people understand the nuance of the issue. It's the extreme messages, like food X is poison, or food X heals, that tend to spread like wildfire. Those messages are easy to remember. They don't require you to think about nuance, and they simplify everything. But when it comes to nutrition and health, things get complicated. And from a nutrition standpoint, if someone has a little dairy in their diet and their overall dietary pattern is health-promoting, I don't see an issue. For someone who has hypercholesterolemia or elevated apoB levels, I'd certainly recommend moderation with butter and concentrated sources of saturated fat. But if you're generally healthy, your lipids are in a good range, and your overall diet is balanced and health-promoting, I don't see a problem with having some dairy, or not.